Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Hess III with Hess 3 Consulting, based out of Phoenix, Arizona. And today we are continuing our webinar series related to the strategic prevention framework and community-based prevention efforts. And today's topic is focusing on SMART goals and logic models. I'm not going to spend much time going through my background, especially for those of you that have participated in our previous sessions. You have heard me talk about myself far too much. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with me, and this is your first time participating with us, you have this or you have access to this presentation. You'll be able to see my bio in person, so you can read through that if you like. Again, about the company, I'll also, not talk about this too much, but the consulting practice that I manage does a wider range of things nationally as well as internationally. And a lot of that work does focus around coalition development. We've done extensive amount of prevention work across the country with the federal government, SAMHSA, as well as the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And so all of these kind of target areas or service domains really are designed to support the prevention work that we all do in our community. So what we're here to talk about today, like I said, is SMART goals and logic models. These two things are different but closely related. And so the goals for today is to provide an overview of SMART goals, what logic models are, and their various uses. We're going to talk about them separately, and then we're going to talk about them together. We're going to review different formats and types of logic models, and then detail the role of logic models in program development, strategic planning, and outcomes monitoring. Logic models are very rich and heavy. Both of these topics, like I said, are very closely related, and they're very nuanced. And so I'm going to caveat today's conversation by saying, and I know that it's on a slide somewhere, the most important thing when talking about goals, strategic plans, logic models, these types of documents, is really paying attention to the compliance per your regulator. So whomever you are contracting with or whomever is asking you to produce a strategic plan or a logic model, they are the individuals you really want to use their definitions, their format, whatever it is that they have provided or whatever instruction that you can get from them, because there are thousands, probably literally dozens, of different structures and formats and models and ways that these two types of tools are operationalized and implemented, and more importantly, interpreted in the work that we do. So if this is kind of an at-will activity where you are electing to develop a strategic plan or a logic model for your coalition, then it's really up to kind of your advisory group or your board of directors or your executive committee to help define the requirements and definitions for how these things are. But I say that to say we could spend days belaboring what is the difference between a goal versus an objective versus an activity versus a task, an input and output and outcome, and the things that we're going to talk about. And so the language that I use may be a little different than language that you've heard before, and that's okay. There's 1,000 ways to skin a cat, as the old saying goes. But what's most important is that you pay attention to the definitions and needs of your regulator or whoever is asking you to do this, because they're the ones that are going to be grading your homework, so to speak. So let's go ahead and dive in. SMART goals, I think that a lot of individuals, this has become very common practice in prevention. And so if you're new to prevention, this definition may be new to you. But if you've been doing this for a while, then you've likely heard the definition or at least the term SMART goals. And again, going back to language, some people use different words to describe what each letter of this acronym means. So the acronym that I use is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timed. Some people swap out attainable for achievable. Some people say time sensitive versus timed, or time limited, or timely. But essentially, while the specific words may be used a little bit different, the intent behind those words I've always seen to be very very consistent. So when we're talking about SMART goals, we're talking about the way in which we write what we want to accomplish. And so you can see at the bottom of the slide, there's an example of an unsmart goal, which would be to end substance use. The problem with this goal inherently is that it's far too broad. There's not any specificity behind it. What does that mean? Do we completely end substance use? Are we ending substance use within the whole world? We're just completely eliminating substance use across the planet. Are there specific substances we're interested in? Because the goal is so broad and so vague, it's impossible to actually know when you've accomplished this goal unless it is to completely eradicate substance use off of the planet, which is a very significant and lofty goal. And so when we're working on SMART goals, and specifically within targeted communities and within targeted populations, we need to be far more detailed in the way that we write this. So this is very much so a writing and linguistics type of activity. So an example of a SMART goal, and I made up this coalition, but the Little Rock Coalition will reduce marijuana use among youth ages 15 to 21 living within the city of Little Rock by 5% by 2017. We see that this goal is very specific. It tells us who, what, where, when, why. It doesn't define the how, but that's where some of the objectives and other components underneath it may do that. It's very measurable. We see the age range, the target population is measurable, youth between the ages of 15 and 21 living within the city of Little Rock. I can measure that. So if I live in Hot Springs, I know I'm not within this target population. Or if I'm 30, I know I'm not within the target population. It's attainable. I think that this people struggle with this, and especially for those of us, especially if you're working on like suicide prevention or something that you're so personally committed to, maybe we really do want to see a 100% eradication of suicide or 100% eradication of substance use. And while that's our long-term goal, and maybe that is attainable by 2025 or 2030 with a really robust effort, it's not attainable by 2017. And so since we have this time-limited component, the relationship between these two things, we want to make sure that we're super realistic. We make this goal something that we can actually do. Again, to end substance use is so broad. It is very difficult to, really kind of make that happen, and people would question it. The reason why this is so important is for the buy-in of your team. If you're going to say, if I walked into a meeting and someone told me we're going to eliminate all suicide, within Arkansas by next year, I don't even believe that that's possible right now based off of the way the state is set up or based off of the current suicide rate. So I can't buy into this goal because it's completely unrealistic. And so it's really important that we're very pragmatic. And I've had feverish debates with people where I was on the high and lofty end of the spectrum, really being optimistic and wanting to really kind of save the world at the snap of a finger, and people have had to talk me down from that. So I get that the personal passion side of things can definitely make this a little bit difficult. But this attainable and realistic is very important. And then timed, and you can see the by 2017 is really speaking to that, so that we know when the end point is. Now, for those of you that may be participating in annual strategic planning, maybe a lot of your goals are designed to be completed by the end of the year, whether that be the calendar year or the fiscal year. But there may be long-term goals that you have on a 3-year strategic plan. We're going to start the work this year. We're going to really, we'll do all the planning and the relationship building and the capacity building, those types of things this year. And we know that next year is when we'll actually work on implementation, and it will take us, 2 years to really move the needle the extent that we want to. And so incorporating those timelines really helps everyone understand that we don't have to do this all right now. We don't have to do it all today. We can push this out, and we're being very pragmatic about the approach. I want to stop right here and ask folks to share their thoughts and understanding if they've learned anything different about SMART goals than what I've shared, if they have any questions at this point in time. So again, if you will use the chat box as your communication method to share with me any thoughts or questions around SMART goals, their definition, how you use them, and of course you can unmute your phone. All right, I'm not seeing anyone typing. This is going to be a rough crowd this afternoon. All right, we're going to work on that. So I will keep plowing forward, but I definitely would appreciate any insight and your thoughts about how this is operationalized. So please help me with interaction. I know it's a little estranged being on the computer and maybe you're sitting in your office by yourself, but we're all here to learn from one another. So I'm definitely interested in your thoughts. So when we're working on SMART goals, again, this specific type of goal is typically included on a strategic plan. And then underneath the goal, there are other tasks, I guess is the word I'll use. And again, some people use this language very specifically, so I don't want to confuse you by saying tasks. But goals are typically the big picture, and then there's normally at least one other layer, but sometimes two, and I've even seen it with three, other layers such as objectives, tasks, activities, that help unpack exactly what it is that we're going to do. So if the goal was, in fact, like it says on our previous slide, to reduce marijuana use among youth ages 15 to 21 living within the city of Little Rock by 5% by 2017. The objectives would probably align with our evidence-based strategies and our environmental strategies that we know work, such as increasing awareness about like a harm reduction campaign. So the objective is a harm reduction campaign, and then the tasks underneath that, would go into we're going to develop messaging, we're going to design and print, flyers, we're going to design and print a billboard, we're going to do a social media campaign. And so it's kind of unpacking exactly how the big picture goal is going to be accomplished. Now, here's that caveat again. The most important thing is to really understand your contractor's definitions and preferred formatting, as they may have preferences related to the order or the definition of some of these terms. And today's not really designed to fully unpack the logic behind some of the variants, but just to create awareness that when asked to write SMART goals, it's important that you really look at that RFP or your contract to figure out, or any technical guidance to figure out what your contractor may be looking for. Any questions so far? Are you guys enjoying this so far? If you'll type yes in the chat box if I'm doing all right, or no in the chat box if you already don't like me. Got one yes. Thank you, Elizabeth. All right. All right, good. I'm forcing you to interact with me. I appreciate it. All right, so what we want to do now is switch gears a little bit. So again, SMART goals are oftentimes used in strategic planning. And we do use them across the board in RFP writing and a number of different things for grant applications and fundraising and program descriptions and all kinds of stuff. Mission statements even sometimes may be time limited if the organization chooses to do that for just like a campaign of some form. But the next step is where this gets a little complicated, and that's when we start talking about logic models. And so logic models are known as a logical framework, a theory of change, a program matrix. It's a tool that is most often used by managers and evaluators to measure program effectiveness. You can see on the left-hand side, there's a number of other terms, again, that are used to describe logic models: roadmaps, mental models, blueprints, program framework, theories, theoretical rationale, causal change, theory of change model. But really the design is to measure this if-then relationship between the activities and the work that we're doing to the anticipated outputs and outcomes of why we're doing the work. And so, again, if X resources are available, then then X services can be provided, and if X services are provided, then X outputs and outcomes are expected. So, to use a very pragmatic example. The problem is I'm really, really hungry. I am like starving hungry. I have $5. So $5 are the resources that are available. There's a hot dog cart on the corner. And those are the services. I'm going to go purchase this hot dog vendor's services with my $5. So if $5 are available, then a hot dog can be provided. If a hot dog is provided, I'm going to have some trash, and those are the outputs, so the wrapper, whatever it is going to be. I might have some heartburn as well, because maybe I shouldn't be eating hot dogs all the time. But the outcome is going to be that my hunger is satiated. I'm satisfied. And so the outputs are really the tangible things that are the byproducts, and the outcomes are really the impact. So my increased quality of life, I have the energy that I need to be able to go about the rest of my day. I'm no longer cranky and bitter when I see people, and I'm willing to smile because I'm no longer hungry. So all of those things are really, it's the if-then relationship. And you can tell or hear in this analogy that there's some really dependent variables. One, I need the resources. I need those $5. Two, I need those services, which is that hot dog vendor. If I'm in the middle of nowhere and there's nothing to eat, I might have $5, but there's no food around for me to purchase. There's no services available, so I'm not getting my needs met. Or I could be in the middle of a food court and not have any money. And so there's this relationship that's really important for us to kind of demonstrate and document on paper. So logic models display the sequence of actions that describe what a program is and what it does. It links the investments to the results. So again, you see this a lot in funding applications, as well as in program descriptions. A donor, a contractor, someone who's willing to give you those resources says, okay, I'm going to give you $100,000. What are you going to do with that? And you can be very vague and say, well, we're going to end substance use, or we're going to save the world, or we're going to annihilate poverty. And again, all of those are unsmart goals. They're too vague, they're too broad, but there's also not a clear logic around, well, how are you going to do that? And how do you know that by whatever you plan on doing, that's going to work? And that's what logic models are designed to do, is connect what you're putting into a program versus to exactly what you're getting out, linking the investments to the results. It's a visual way to present those relationships, and it explains why your strategy is a good solution to the identified need. And so, I think there's a couple of examples that we're going to get to in a second, but I want to make a couple of, I'm going to say funny comments, but that might be really overrated. What's oftentimes a mistaken logic, here's the point. The first word in logic models is logic. This is all about demonstrating the logical relationship or logical connection between what people are giving you, what you're doing, and what they're getting for it. And so what happens a lot in organizations, and I talk about this all the time because I'm very passionate about performance optimization and effectiveness and really getting to outcomes, driving us to outcomes. There's a significant difference between running on a treadmill and exerting your energy and not going anywhere versus getting in your car and driving to somewhere you need to be. Say it's a 10-mile distance. I can run 10 miles on a treadmill and I'll be exhausted, but I haven't gotten to the hospital if that's where I need to go, or to my mom's house or whatever. I haven't actually moved the mark. I've just expended a lot of energy. And unfortunately for some organizations, we think that because we're busy, that we're being effective. And those are two totally separate things. And it's something that we just need to look at and consider and think about and really make sure that we're exerting our energy and efforts in a way that is actually moving the mark and actually moving the needle. And that's the intent of these logic models. And so just because we're able to raise money or we're able to get people to like us doesn't mean we're doing a whole lot or that we're actually moving the needle. And I know that sounds really critical, and I hope you guys are taking that with a grain of salt. But it's just something that to check ourselves. And again, the logic model is a opportunity for us to really depict the evidence behind the efforts and work that we're doing. So one of the things that I wanted to take a pause for, and I'm sure all of you guys are very familiar with Star Wars and some love, or Star Trek, excuse me, in some degree or fashion, and the Vulcan community is a very hard logic, non-emotional world. But so again, this is me attempting to be silly. It's probably not translating very well. But want to take a pause for us to think about the logical rationale and decision making that we use within our programs, and how might a greater degree of how do I say this? How might spending more time focusing on the logic and the rationale behind our approach, how that may make our programs more effective? I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or questions kind of on this discussion, but I would love to hear from folks around, how decision making and how strategies are identified within the coalition or within your community groups, and what the process, the logical rationale process, looks like behind identifying some of those strategies. Again, I'll give you guys an opportunity to chat in the chat box. Of course, unmute your phone or your computer if you have a microphone. But I'm really interested in hearing from you guys on how do you land on and decide the strategies, goals, and activities that you and your coalitions do or perform. All right, I'm not seeing anyone type in, so that's okay. Maybe we can take that as a rhetorical question or take it as a takeaway. And as we go further into the actual process of the logic model, I think this may make a little bit more sense. Thank you, Amy. So looking at sustainability, even if you're funded for a time, you still have to choose a program that can be sustained even after funding ends. Absolutely, I think that that's a great scenario which presents this challenge. Is that while, and again, I don't say this to disparage any of the activities that people do, but for many, many years I was involved in a lot of outreach programs, and we would do these big, huge, massive campaigns where we would, give away clothing and give away toothbrushes, and I've even done some work internationally, and these teams would come in from the United States and they would spend, $3,000 to fly to, India or Costa Rica or the Philippines or, a couple of other countries that I was able to work in. And they would come in for 2 weeks and they would pass out toothbrushes. And, they'd bring their suitcases full of toothbrushes and pass them out. And then once they were gone, once they went back home, there was no sustainable source behind this. Like it was a handout, not a hand up, or kind of the giving them a fish versus teaching people to fish type of approach. And while it was an excellent, good deed, it was very charitable and well-natured and intentioned. Let's say this out loud. I just paid $3,000 to pass out toothbrushes on the other side of the world. It doesn't there's logic check here. There's a logic check, and if I had used those $3,000 to start a microloan program or whatever, other types of things, there may have been a more viable way to impact that community to help individuals. Maybe I could have started a toothbrush making factory. When you have 10 people paying $3,000, that's $30,000. That may have been enough. I don't know. But there's lots of different ways. And so I think that looking at sustainability is an excellent example. And Amy, I really appreciate you sharing that as an option. So the intent, the reason why do we make logic models, and I won't shy away from the fact that I am possibly the only person I have ever met in my life that loves making logic models, which makes me an even bigger nerd than you probably already thought I was. But the intention and the use behind logic models is to provide your stakeholders with a roadmap of exactly what you're doing. If you're giving me $100,000 or $10,000 or $1,000, I want you to know exactly where that money is going and how that money is actually going to make a difference and an impact. And so one of my favorite quotes is on here on the slide. If you don't know where you're going, any path will take you there. Or I always say, if you don't know where you're going, you'll get there every time, because you're just bound, to lose yourself in the process and exert a lot of energy. Versus if you take the time to constructively and concretely define the roadmap from a logical, rational methodology or approach, then you'll know exactly where you're headed and exactly how you're getting there, and you'll be able to get as much accuracy in your intended outcomes as humanly possible. So, as I mentioned, logic models have a number of formats, and you can see on this slide, and I know most of these are very small, so they may be hard to see, but there's lots of different ways that folks can use them. And so the most common way is this very top, the 4 black circles, typically in a table fashion, to where you design your inputs. Again, those are those resources that we talked about earlier, the activities and the work that you're going to be doing. So again, this may be coming off of your strategic plan, and your SMART goals would have informed those. So that's really the relationship and intersection behind those things. So your activities are the services. Remember, we talked about the hot dog cart. That's your activities right there. Your outputs are what happens after that. How do we know that this was done? And I think people struggle a lot with outputs, especially when trying to understand outputs versus outcomes. And so the best way that I always think about this is, if I eat a Snickers bar, the output is the wrapper. There's a byproduct, there's trash, it's the unintended, but it's typically tangible. So if you're hosting a training such as today, this webinar, the output of this training today is the attendance roster that Lorraine has been keeping, the evaluations that you guys will be completing at the end of this, the amount of, I would say those are probably the 2 simplest examples. The outcomes, however, is the impact. This is what was the benefit of doing this activity. So if I ate a Snickers bar, the benefit is I have 1,000 calories of energy, and hopefully I'm going to use that to go run for an hour. Otherwise, it will just assist my waistline in making my pants tighter. And so, but the outcomes are, again, the benefit. So while the outputs of today's training are the attendance roster and those evaluations, the intended outcome, and hopefully the outcome of today's training, is your increase in knowledge. You guys have learned something new. Hopefully you have developed or learned new skills that you'll be able to use within your coalition or within your community group. The ability to create a logic model would be an outcome. A deeper understanding of SMART goals would be an outcome of today's training. So outputs are tangible. It's the trash, the byproduct, the candy wrapper. The outcomes are the impact. Some people like to do, like you can see on here, there's this tree model, which is a really kind of creative, artistic way to design these. And so the very bottom is going to be your inputs. Your tree trunks are going to be typically your activities. Your branches are your outputs. And then like your leaves are going to be your outcomes. There's also this tabular function, which is down here. And this is another way to kind of express, it's almost like a relationship matrix. And you can see all the lines that connect it at the bottom here from your inputs, activities, your outputs, and your outcomes. So there's lots of different ways to depict your logic model. Again, this is just the basic structure, and I think there's a couple of slides on this that go through your inputs, your activities, your outputs, and your outcomes. And again, we've been using outcomes interchangeably with impact, again, based off of your regulator and who is asking you for this. Your impact may be like, so your outcomes, again, we'll use this training as an example. So the outputs are the attendance roster, the evaluations. The outcomes is your increase in knowledge as an attendee and your increased skills in being able to create a logic model. The environmental impact is going to be even a step larger and more broad. It's going to be a better trained, an increase in capacity within the prevention community, stronger functioning coalitions that are able, so it's what you as a participant now do with this knowledge. Your ability to now optimize your activities and your coalition efforts to have a greater impact, and hopefully that would result in more effective prevention. So you would even be able to say that the impact could be linked to an additional reduction in substance use or an additional reduction in suicide, because your coalitions are now operating more effectively, your organization is operating more effectively as a result of participating in this training. So again, I know that you're getting kind of far out there, and you need to be able, the intention of the logic model is that it's logical. So you need to be able to connect those dots in a logical and rational way. I may have been stretching it, but it's just intended as an example. Let's see. So I'm going to skip through this again, it just reinforces the structure from which we've already been talking about. And so I wanted to take some time to dive into the application of logic models. And maybe I should back up and just for just a second. So when we started today's presentation, we were talking about SMART goals. And this all exists within the broader context of the strategic prevention framework. And so and I don't have the image here with me, so forgive me, but in the strategic prevention framework, we know that it starts off with an assessment, and then it moves into capacity building, and then it goes into your strategy session or strategic planning. So while you're in that strategy bucket, that's where these SMART goals come into play, and where your logic model would come into play. So you facilitate a strategic planning session, and you say, okay, we're going to do a public relation, we're going to do an education and awareness campaign. We're going to increase the availability of prescription drug drop-off locations. If you guys have those canisters where people can turn in their old prescription drugs. And we're going to work with law enforcement to have harsher punishment for prescription drug-based DUIs or prescription drug abuse, basically. So you're going to do some training with police so they can identify signs and symptoms and those things. So within those three things, your strategic plan will say just those three things. You know, the goal is, the goal is to reduce substance abuse. The activities are going to be this education and awareness campaign, this increased availability of prescription drug drop-off points, and this harsher punishment for violations of prescription drug misuse. Well, your logic model would then support this. So you would facilitate your strategic planning session, and then you go back to the drawing board or go back to your research that you pulled in your assessment, and you really say, okay, so how do we do this in a way that we know that it works, or how do we know that what we're doing is going to work? And so, going back, let me flip back up just a little bit. So your resources and inputs, let's take your education and awareness campaign so we're looking at column 1, resources and inputs right here. So the resources we have, we have $1,000 that comes from our contract, or maybe we've had a series of bake sales or whatever it is. We have a $1,000 budget for this education and awareness campaign. So the resources we're going to use We know that we need to create a pamphlet and a brochure. Susie on the coalition is really savvy and really creative, and she can do that for free. So it's not actually going to cost us any money to design it. She's just going to design it for us with lots of good info. But we do need to print it, and that's going to cost some money. So resources and inputs is this brochure. We're going to say the brochure is going to cost $200 to print. The next thing we're going to do is put together, because it's education and awareness, so we're going to pull together some training. We're going to create a PowerPoint, and we're going to offer this PowerPoint to community groups, to parents, to schools, to churches, etc. So the PowerPoint, the actual development of the PowerPoint, again, isn't going to cost us anything, but we want to entice people with incentives. So we're going to make sure that we have coffee and snacks at all of the refreshments, at all the training. So that's going to cost, I don't know, $500. So we spent $700 of our $1,000 so far just on training expenses and printing brochures and everything like that. And we're going to use our last $300. I don't know what a good idea would be. We're going to create magnets for people to take home with them, and we're going to print those. So everyone that leaves the training is going to get a magnet, and it's going to sit on their fridge, and that's going to be our $300. So resources and inputs are the $1,000, and you would itemize them. Your activities are those three things we just talked about: the brochure, the training, and then the magnets. The outputs, again, of your brochure would hopefully be that you run out of brochures. So it's the printed materials. The outputs of the training is going to be your attendance sheets. Maybe you're doing a pre and post test. You're going to do to document increase in knowledge. Maybe you get contact information for people so you can invite them to your coalition. You can get a lot of outputs in that area. And then your outputs for your magnets, again, is you're going to disperse or disseminate, these 1,000 magnets, or however many magnets you've gotten printed. The outcomes of all these activities are going to be that increase in knowledge. So again, the goal is education and awareness. Your outcome should align with your goal. So hopefully, through your education and awareness, there's going to be increased knowledge and increased awareness. You see how those two things are intimately associated and related with one another. And so when I step back and I say, and I look at this and I say, there's clearly our needs assessment identified this need for additional awareness and education around prescription drug misuse in our community. This logic model clearly shows me that by investing $1,000, printing brochures, offering training, and letting people walk or go home, take away home a magnet, I can see where this is going to result in an increase in knowledge and an increase awareness. And again, your pre and post tests, which are your outputs from your training, are going to document, and that's the evidence, that's the verification of the increase in knowledge. So this becomes completely a logical sequence of how, by me giving you $1,000, you're going to increase knowledge and awareness around prescription misuse in your community. And so I don't have any questions about it. Versus if, again, if I give you $1,000 and you said you're going to have a bake sale to increase awareness about prescription drug misuse, I don't see the connection there. That doesn't make sense to me. And it doesn't pass the logic test, yet alone the evidence basis test, nor does it speak to the needs that were identified in your needs assessment. So we're going to skip. I'm going to pause because I've been talking a whole lot. So, Lorraine, thank you for your question. So where you have outcomes and impact, could that also be the same as a short-term and long-term outcomes? If I'm understanding your definition of short-term and long-term outcomes, I think that there are some similarities there. Again, I have probably operated and seen at least a dozen or 2 dozen different legitimate formats, structures, terms, definitions around how logic models and even strategic plans are constructed. And of course, I even have my own preferred, kind of way that I like to do this. And so I have merged the two together and created my own structure and format. So these things are very customized. While short-term outcomes definitely be kind of those immediate in the moment, what's happening right now, the way that I have seen the word impact be used is, again, is the outcome of training or of today is the participants' increase in knowledge. The impact is their ability to have more effective prevention within their community. So it's kind of making it just that much more macro, and I don't want to say generic or vague, but it is taking it to the broader level of, well, what benefit is the participants in today's webinar, what's the benefit of them increasing in this knowledge? I know a whole lot of stuff about a whole bunch of pointless things, and there's no benefit about me knowing them. Actually, as a kid, I used to have a book called Totally Useless Skills. It was one of my favorite books, and I haven't forgotten all of those totally useless skills, but they're totally useless. And so, I think that the design behind the impact portion of this particular model is to describe what is the benefit of that increase in knowledge, or the benefit of the outcomes to the broader community. What other questions exist before we continue to plow forward? And we actually are a little bit ahead of schedule, so we have some time if you guys have some questions. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and ask that over the next couple of minutes as I'm talking. If you wouldn't mind, please submit some questions for me, because we will have some time at the end for Q&A, and I normally don't, so I'm excited to be able to do that with you today. So feel free to fill the chat box with questions, and that will allow or facilitate a really rich discussion. So the logic models and program development, so again, the intention, and we talked about this, you go through your needs assessment, you do your capacity building, and now we're on the strategy side of the strategic prevention framework. So we facilitate strategic planning, and then we use the goals that were identified in strategic planning to start populating our logic models. And so the activities that are on your strategic plan should be the same activities that are on your logic model. Because again, the point is to demonstrate, why are we doing what we're doing? Make the linkage between what's the benefit of these identified activities and their anticipated outcomes. So the logic model brings conceptual ideas to life by documenting how services and programs produce positive change. It helps answer that, how do we know what we're reducing? How do we know what we are doing produces the desired result? Can really help identify organization structure, again, especially those inputs. So in the strategic plan, you're going to talk about, we're going to create an education and marketing campaign, but it doesn't describe what it actually takes to create an education and marketing campaign. If you guys, well, I'm sure most of you have probably done that. It takes someone who knows graphic design or some type of design. It takes content development. It takes printing and duplication. It takes dissemination methods, whether that be, getting volunteers to walk neighborhoods and put flyers on doors, or social media knowledge, or a billboard, and those different skill sets are all different types of inputs that go into a really effective education and marketing campaign. So it helps you identify what your needs are. And then it clearly articulates those program concepts to stakeholders and funders. So this is why, again, a lot of private foundations, public foundations, and funding groups such as the state or a Medicaid authority, they oftentimes are going to ask for these centered around money. So whenever you're getting money, be prepared to create a logic model to justify that money. So this is something you can type in the chat box for me. Give me a yes or a Y or me or whatever you would like. For those of you that are on the webinar that have completed a logic model before, I probably should have asked this in the very beginning, but how many of you guys have done a logic model before? And if you haven't, type no for me. I want to see a response from everyone if possible. All right, thank you all. We've got a good response there. So yeah, it does look like this is somewhat of a new approach. Like I said, being a logic model junkie that I am, I develop these all the time when I'm creating new programs, organizations, which I have the opportunity to do quite frequently with some of my clients. And again, it helps identify the why behind what we're doing. We're going to keep moving forward. So we've talked about this a little bit. So logic models and strategic planning based on the program and the program design. Logic models help sequence events to produce the desired change. It identifies your needed resources and key strategies. I would absolutely say that is one of the key things. We don't do in prevention. There's not a whole lot of unintended, like really dramatic unintended consequences, I should say. But fast translating ourselves to maybe some public health strategies or some public health work. There's a lot of unintended consequences that go into various public health approaches and different things that get implemented here in the United States as well as across the world in a global perspective. And so those outputs also become a really critical component. Again, the output of eating a Snickers bar is the trash. Well, if by implementing a strategy, you are accumulating tons and tons and tons, literally metric tons of trash, that's going to become a significant issue, and it becomes, a waste and disposal or recycling or environmental issue. And you may need to address the outputs of your activities. And so it's definitely something to pay attention to. It's not something I see a whole lot within the prevention genre, but it definitely does happen. Logic models also require activities to be supported by evidence-based practices. So when we're describing the logic and informing what we're doing, they really help articulate the why and how do we know this works? Who said that creating prescription drug cans, disposal units, who said that works? Like, where's the evidence behind that? And so there actually is quite a bit of evidence that goes into the environmental strategies that SAMHSA supports. Obviously, if it's SAMHSA's promoting it, it's probably got some strong evidence behind it. But it is an evidence-based practice, and maybe it sounds foreign to someone, but your logic model would create the opportunity to present that evidence and say, actually, here's some research that demonstrates the effectiveness of having prescription drug return bins or disposal bins, placed intermittently throughout a community. People do use them. They do get tons, literally metric tons of prescription drugs off the streets. And that helps, reduce access to, these substances. And then this is kind of my personal adaptation, and I'm giving away my secret sauce here, but you can adapt the logic model to include your strategic plan and project management components. And so I should have included it. Maybe I did. Actually, I think I did. A template that I use, we'll get to it in just a second, that really encompasses kind of the goals, objectives, activities, or goals, strategies, activities of your strategic plan, along with some of the project monitoring or process monitoring tools you would want in order to measure your progress towards completion. And so I will share that with you guys momentarily. And so because of the linear structure of logic models, they can clearly connect those needs and services. So the intent, and I feel like I'm beating a dead horse a little bit, so I'll get off the soapbox, but it really is connecting the dots, A to B. What we're doing works, and here's how, and here's why, and it makes logical sense. So you're able to track your activities performed. This is going into my personalized or customized approach to this. Tracking your activities builds in the process monitoring into your logic model, and here's that template that I was talking about. So your identified need here you see is your teen substance abuse. Your strategies and activities, again, this is all coming off of your strategic plan. And typically on a strategic plan, you would see, your goal, your strategy activity, your person responsible, and your due date. Those are the core, 5 components. And so you see all of that. And then you can also see in here where I've incorporated the key components of a logic model, which are going to be your inputs, well, your strategies, activities, but then your inputs, your outputs, and your outcomes. And so those are all on here. And then you can see from a project management perspective, and I'm a certified project manager, so I do this a lot, you can see that progress towards completion, and that's kind of your process monitoring and tracking, so that you'll know at the beginning of the year we said that to address teenage substance abuse we were going to do an educational campaign. We said we were going to do in-person training. We needed to create the curriculum. We needed to identify the venue. We needed to create the evaluations. Robert, did you do what you said you were going to do? And you can see here I was a good coalition member, and I did all of my work, and I'm good to go. And what we did was we ended up training 15 people, and the outcome of that is those 15 moms signed a commitment card to decrease, to lock up their alcohol. And so the outcome of that was we decreased access to alcohol in those 15 homes, and we increased awareness. So this one kind of approach, my logic model 2.0, is kind of an all-encompassing document that allows you to not only track your strategic goals as an agency, but the activities through their end and until their anticipated outcome, and so the impact of that work. And of course, you can see in the other examples where it shows you, we're 5% complete on meeting with the mayor, and we haven't even started writing the city ordinance because we're waiting for the mayor to give us the green light. But it's only February and we have until July, so we're okay. Any questions on any of that? All right, I didn't see any additional questions come into the chat box, which means for the first time in my webinar history, we may actually get out of here early, 2 minutes early. So I hope that today has been really helpful for you. If you wouldn't mind, in order to receive credit for today's webinar for participating, you do need to complete this survey. And so if you scroll to the very, very top of the chat box, there is this link is available for you there, and you can use that to access the survey. Oops, I'm attempting to copy and paste it for you so that it will be even more accessible. Of course, this is my email address, so you can ask questions and reach out. That's also my cell phone number, so you can reach out to me personally if you have any questions. If for whatever reason you guys are interested, I'm happy to send out a template that includes this kind of approach that I described of your logic model 2.0. Like I said, some people keep your strategic plan as one document, your logic model as a second document, and then you have a project plan or an activities worksheet as a third document. And I just think that's really silly when they're all very similar. So this is my own approach. I'm happy to share that with folks if they're interested in it. But if there aren't any questions, I'll give you a second to type any questions you have, or Lorraine, if there's any notes or comments you would like to make, please do so now in the chat box. And otherwise, I think we are good to go. Thank you guys so much for participating today.